So we have seen that the integral pedagogy model has the 5 areas. We have the context. We are doing a little recap. We have the context. Context is everything, the background, the education platform of the student, his family background, the cultural background, his growing development stages, his age needs, all these things come under the context. The teachers also, what subject they are teaching and what is their goal, aim of education, all this will also come within the context. And as we notice that experience is basically all that we do in our teaching, the technology, the explanation, the direct experience, indirect experience, not only presenting the content and making it intelligible, but also in one sense focusing on the imagination and focusing on the feeling. You relate the topic, the learning content, and open up their imagination to think beyond the content, to think beyond on the topic, but to think beyond what is stated in the books, and also to arouse the feeling. And then we saw this dimension, reflection, which is a core component of the integral pedagogy, to see how does this topic connect with human reality, connect with what is the human significance of the topic, whether it is in one's individual life or in one communitarian life. So that was the reflection. And then once you reflect on this, my assumptions, my attitude, we come to action, which invoke change in the way I look at things, change in attitude, change in behavior, and finally we come to the evaluation. In the evaluation, we see about what has been my growth that has taken place, and all that becomes the starting point of another cycle. So this is basically the integral pedagogical model is the context of the teacher, of the students. This happens in the classroom in terms of the project, in terms of teaching, but also remember it is not only the cognitive level, but it also touches the imagination and the feeling. Here we come to raising questions of human significance. How is the topic related to me? How is the topic connected to what is happening in our community, in our society, in the global world? And then from there we move into action. What does this mean to me? From here, where do I go? What happens to me as a result of this reflection? That is action. And then we have evaluation. And just to go quickly through that so that we can place ourselves.
Physical therapy and athletic training. I'd like to welcome you to this. I'm going to be talking today about the 5 elements of Ignatian pedagogy. And this is a process. It's not a prescription. You don't have to take and go from one point to the next, but it's a concept of how you can best teach at using Ignatian pedagogy. The first of the 5 elements is context. Context heralds back to the idea in the exercises, the spiritual exercises, of finding God in all things. And that's a basic tenet that God is in all human beings. And so we're thinking about that as we're teaching. That translates into creating a safe learning environment for our students where there's trust and honesty and integrity. And it allows us to be open to the values and convictions of our students and us to share those things. And we incorporate it as necessary or as appropriate in our learning situations. The next is reflection. And reflection is a hallmark of Jesuit education. And you might be saying to yourself, well, how do I get the students to reflect, or how do I do this in my limited time as a teacher? Well, one of the ways that you might do it is to do a concept called a 1-minute reflection. And many of you may be familiar with this. And this is where you have the students write down quickly, 1 minute, what they learned or what they got from the conversation that you were having in class or the concepts. You can collect those at the end of class, get an idea of whether the students are really understanding at the level you want them to understand, or maybe where you need to go back and dig a little bit deeper. When you consider reflection, you're really looking at getting the students to internalize what you've been talking to them about, what you've been having them read. You want them to pull together the concepts and the values that you've discussed. Marc Poussin has talked about this in the past at CTE events, and he talked about saying when you look at an event such as a service learning event or other things, you ask, what happened? Then you ask, so what? What's the importance of what has happened or what we've discussed? And then finally, now what? What do I do with those concepts? So reflection is not superficial. It doesn't just stop when you say, this is what I experienced, but rather, why was that experience important to me, and now what am I going to do with that experience? It's going in deeper. It's the magis, that going to a deeper level that you hear spoken of and in Jesuit institutions. Do you provide that opportunity for your students, and do you hold them to the level of bringing it to that so what and now what depth that we all need to help our students really grow? The third of the 5 elements of Ignatian pedagogy is experience. And here's where you use the students' experiences, your experiences, to help the students to draw connections between the things that they are learning, the new concepts, maybe to adapting concepts that they've learned earlier. One of the techniques I tend to use in this is a think, pair, share activity. And in that, you present a concept, you have the students think about that in their own head, because it's sometimes hard to right away pull all this information together and raise their hands and be brave about it. So then they share it with the person sitting next to them, that's the pair, and finally one of the 2 of those students may actually share it with the entire class. It's much less threatening way to share a new concept or even begin to explore a new concept. Imagination is another way of experiencing that, having the students picture themselves in a situation. What would they do? Why is it important to behave in a certain way? And then they can share that with either the class in a paper to you or with one another. The fourth of the 5 elements is action. A tried and true method is the Socratic method. Conversations. Much teaching can occur that way, that sharing of concepts. Another is service learning. And a further one that probably most of us are more comfortable with, that fits well in the context of our classroom, is group projects, group activities. Any learning activity that can make the content real to the student is going to be useful, and it really implies the action element of Ignatian pedagogy. And finally, it wouldn't be Ignatian pedagogy if we didn't think about evaluation. Because one of the key components of Ignatian pedagogy and the spiritual exercises is this concept of examen, to think about at the end of your day or in the middle of your day, what went well, what didn't go well, how do you need to change your actions. That's a great technique that I actually use at the end of each one of my class sessions, or at least I try to. Some days will let me do it, some days will not. But I take a few minutes to really reflect on what went well in that class session, what didn't, how can I change it, what might I do differently the next time around, or even when I go back into class the next time. I may need to spend some time making sure the concepts were learned properly, or I may need to make sure that if I've said something that was maybe confusing to the students, that we straighten that out. So if you use these 5 elements, you're going to find that you're at least I found that I'm happier in my teaching. It allows me to really engage the students more, and I come away from that situation feeling like I have a better grasp of what the students have learned and what still is causing them to struggle in their learning process. I hope this has been helpful for you. I know it's been helpful for me in the past.
Experience of a teacher who's been following integral pedagogy. So, at the end of the day, what she's saying is, she has found this helping the students because it is helping them to reflect on their experience. And so the goal, as we saw last year, was the goal of integral pedagogy is definitely we want them to do well academically. So our transmission of knowledge, that means we need to transmit the knowledge, communicate the knowledge very well. We need to ensure they are analyzing, synthesizing, having all the skills so that they are competent students. Now, we are not only giving that experience, but we are reflecting on the experience. So when you reflect on your experience, that knowledge becomes deeper. And so we are making it deeper. Why we want to make it deeper for them is so that they are forming their attitudes, forming their behavior. And so they focus on formation of students. So when we integrate reflection in our teaching process, what are we trying to ensure? We are trying to give opportunities for students to reflect on their experience. And because they reflect on their experience, they are able to connect it into different dimensions, the multiple roles that they play in their lives, Like many of you, you are a parent, you are a teacher, you are a guide, you can do those things. And why are we forming students? We are not just forming students just for themselves to live in isolation, but to contribute something to the society, the transformation of society. Okay? So this is the process of the integral pedagogy, from transmission of knowledge to, in that process, to form students so that they become contributing members of society. So at the end of the day, what the integral pedagogy is looking at students who are, in one sense, growing in competence, the person of conscience, who know what to choose between right and wrong, they are of compassion, a heart, a social heart, and their commitment to their work, to the society, for the common good. So this is what we are talking about. So these are the areas that we are talking about, that at the end of the day, we are preparing students for the common good, for the welfare of the society. Okay.